Okay, then let's just start. So again, someone is welcome to all of you. So welcome to today's lecture in our course City Matters within the Master Socio-Spatial Planning. And in particular, you already see Benjamin Davy, our guest today. So a warm welcome to him as current president of AESOP, the Association of European Schools of Planning. So we are very proud to have him here, and we are honored to speak to him because originally he intended to visit us in Groningen today, which is not possible due to the current corona crisis and travel restrictions, and that we are not allowed to meet in person. So we are very happy to have him here in our Blackboard environment today, and to have it. So welcome to all of you. I see 25 of you here, so it might be that 1-2 more join us the next few minutes. That's great. And during the next roughly 2 hours, we will have 2 parts. So the first part will be that Benjamin Davy and me will have kind of an open discussion around spatial planning and dignity. It builds upon a talk that we had with each other last year in so we somehow adjusted our thoughts since last year. We put some further thoughts in there. What does Corona mean towards the end? So we will take roughly, let's say, 45 minutes, maybe a bit more or less around that. Feel free to use the chat box to comment in between, to discuss with each other. We will also have a look at the chat box if you post questions or ideas on what we are talking about. And then we will use the second for a more lively discussion, so then also with you speaking. So I ask you to switch off your microphone as long as you're not speaking, that we don't get distracted by other noise. And for the second part, then we will open that to you, and you can either raise your hand, the button in the middle lower part, or just speak up then, and then we'll find a way to get in a more lively discussion. Also reflecting upon your in our excursion last week. It was just last week. So last week that we came back from Belgrade. Difficult to imagine from today's perspective, but it happened as such. So Benjamin Davy, again, great to have you here. Welcome. And would you like to say something else to introduce you?
Thank you very much, Christian, and welcome to everybody. I'm totally not used to this format. I try to imagine you because usually I've been talking to a class and I have people in front of me, and now I just have my little laptop in front of me. I'm very much looking forward to that session, and these are exciting times. Last week I've been in Vienna, and we had a meeting of the Council of Representatives of AESOP, and with a very heavy heart we decided to cancel our annual Congress. 2 people have left the session, Christian. Is that a technical thing, or are we boring them already?
I think it's more a technical thing,
yeah.
but
I can see that.
Just continue.
And in a way, last week that was no, it was actually the week before last week. We had our session in Vienna, and we were very unsure whether this is the correct decision, whether canceling the annual Congress of AESOP, which really is a huge event and very important for the planning schools of Europe, is the right thing to do. And I think, considering what has happened since then, it was a correct decision. But with the future, it's always difficult to tell. That's part of the uncertainty. Maybe let's just jump into it, and I would like to start with reminding us to how important human dignity is for the European Union. And I've prepared to show you the, am I sharing that already?
Yes, we can see
The
it.
Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union from 2012. And in the Charter, dignity is the title of the first part. But the Charter starts with a preamble. And I will now direct you to this paragraph where it says, conscious of its spiritual and moral heritage, the Union is founded on the indivisible, universal values of human dignity, freedom, equality, and solidarity. It is based on the principles of democracy and the rule of law. It places the individual at the heart of its activities by establishing the citizenship of the Union and by creating an area of freedom, security, and justice. So, in the preamble of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, human dignity is one, the first, indivisible, universal value the Union is founded upon. And if we continue to the Title 1, it's called Dignity, and Article 1, Human Dignity. Article 2, the right to life. Article 3, the right to the integrity of the person. Article 4, prohibition of torture and inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. And Article 5, prohibition of slavery and forced labor. This is a bit of a lawyerly approach to dignity, but since this is such a fundamental text, the Charter, I think it's well worth understanding how important it is for the European Union, which means for every country and every citizen in every country of the European Union. From the perspective of text structure, it's interesting that Title 1 is called Dignity and Article 1 is called Human Dignity. I think this is a bit unwitting, but there is a lot of debate going on whether other entities but humans have dignity, particularly animals and machines. This is the more than human debate. And obviously, the European Union did not want to enter into the more than human debate, but enumerates a number of very important fundamental rights: human dignity, the right to life, right to the integrity of the person, abolition of slavery, and prohibition of torture. So this is sort of the basis, or if you are looking at human dignity from a legal perspective, it's a sort of basis for discussing human dignity. Article 1 says human dignity is inviolable. It must be respected and protected.
Yeah,
And that, of course, raises the question, what does that mean? What is human dignity?
yeah, in our course, we've talked a lot about urban inequality, social spatial justice, and especially we looked at mechanisms of exclusion from using spaces, and also about ways in which planning layout of our cities excludes people from using spaces. Can that work together with the dignity of every person, as you just explained, if we deliberately exclude people from using spaces?
I think that this is one of the most important questions regarding dignity and its relationship to sovereignty or to human needs. And I've prepared a slide which is part of my poster series. And you can download these posters at I put it in the chat box. So since 2005, I produced 14 posters each year and put them in the faculty lounge at the School of Spatial Planning in Dortmund. And Joseph William Singer is one of the authors I quoted on one of these posters. And here's the quote: "Here is a simple truth. Human beings have needs, and we cannot live without access to the things we need. Here is another truth. Both sovereignty and property are premised on exclusion. That leaves us with a problem. How do we reconcile our needs and our borders?" And I think that this quote is a good start to respond to your question, Christian. Because what is important to understand is that inevitably there will be exclusion in life, in society, and certainly in planning. Planning, in a way, is a form of managed exclusion. If a spatial plan designates a plot of land for use as a hospital or as a residence or as a public park, it virtually excludes this plot of land from every other uses. And this exclusion is really important because you cannot have a residence and a hospital and a public park and a supermarket on the same plot of land. So in order to make land uses and the spatial ordering of land uses functional, you need to have the power to exclude, and planners are doing that. And in different systems of planning throughout Europe and all over the world, planners use different tools and mechanisms to organize this exclusion. Sometimes it's very strict and sometimes it's more pervasive, but it is always at the heart of the business of planning, to exclude.
So you explain that some spaces are built to exclude, or basically all spaces are then planned or built to exclude?
Yes.
Some give special protection to specific groups, hospital, parks, playgrounds, for and so on. But we have thoughts that help us to draw the line between how much of this exclusion is justified and when it's really an unjust exclusion from using this space.
The connection between dignity and exclusion becomes apparent when we think about legitimate land uses and we look at a community, a municipality, a city, a region, and we ask ourselves, where can certain uses that we consider legitimate, where can they happen? Where is it possible? And if the exclusion organized by spatial plans assigns a place, a space for these uses, for every legitimate use somewhere, then I think it's just a matter of organization. The big problem with human dignity and exclusion through planning arises if for legitimate uses there is no space at all. And there are a number of uses where you can see that municipalities find it really very, very difficult to make space for them. Personally, I've been involved a lot in looking at homelessness. And with regard to homelessness, many cities have very restrictive policies. And in the end, people who have no home, they simply are denied the right to exist. And that, of course, is a huge violation of human dignity. Mentioning homelessness and the COVID crisis, what we see now is that the good advice of social distancing, stay at home, requires, of course, that somebody has a home. And if you do not have a home, you cannot stay at home. And the homeless in every city are among the most vulnerable populations now in times of COVID.
So what does it mean more in particular? Do we exclude them now not only from using our spaces, but also from our, because obviously we do not have a homeless person in our room here?
Well, that's a sophisticated question.
And we cannot get out to talk to a homeless one on the street.
Actually,
we don't even see them if we...
I just introduced the idea of homeless persons, so somehow homeless people are very much represented in our discussion. But this is, of course, one of the problems. Single parents, sick people, children who are exposed to domestic violence. There are only very, very few politicians and very few institutions who speak with a strong voice for them. People with disabilities. We have a constant process of negotiation in our society and in our political domain where people try to claim voice and try to make sure that their needs and interests are considered. And that is, of course, a process that's closely related to human dignity.
But if we all now talk about stay at home, stay in your house, it somehow means that you have a home, a house, some kind of property, or it'll control. But some people are excluded for that. What about in general? Does private property mean a certain way of exclusion that's suspicious from a human dignity perspective? You exclude others without sufficient means, without access to private property.
One of my favorite authors is John Locke, and he was a philosopher, political philosopher, and he wrote a book called The Two Treatises on Government. And John Locke and his property theory of labor thought that by working, people deserve to acquire property as much as anyone can make use of to any advantage of life before it spoils. So much he may by his labor fix a property in. And of course, this poster is sending an ironic message about that. I took that at Schwechat Airport, and I was appalled. I thought it's really a violation of dignity to exercise property rights in a way where you buy 125 grams of caviar for 800 euros, and where this is offered to people who fly from Vienna to New York or to New Delhi, and somehow I had to think this morning about this poster, because it is not only about property, but it's also about the relationship between property and dignity. And on the one hand, you need to have mechanisms and institutions like property to protect a personal space, which is indispensable for human dignity.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, if property rights allow somebody or some people to accumulate more and more and more wealth, then this very well can become a problem for human dignity. And yes, in a way, I'm thinking that it can be a problem for a person's human dignity to have too much.
Oh,
This
thank you.
this is not just
For all the others on the posters. So to all the others, if this is the two posters that we've seen so far are part of a larger collection that was annually renewed, and they were all on the first floor of the School of Spatial Planning in Dortmund, so right around Ben Davy's department and next to the dean's office. So if you ever walked into the faculty building and took a walk around there, you moved all these data, making you think of your perspective on dignity, on property, on space, and on planning. So it was an annual exhibition. You can see all the posters online. So just connect photos that make you think of these aspects connected to important key thinkers in philosophy, in planning, in property theory, and related fields. If we get back,
thank you very much for
Mhm.
explaining that. I just see that Elisa has asked a question, and I hope that Elisa have been responding to that question, and that Agathe has raised the question, what about mixed use spaces? And of course, this is a very important question and a very important idea. Mixed use spaces are one of the best things planners can do to organize the use of urban spaces by a wide variety of interest groups and of stakeholders. So the more you have well-organized mixed spaces, particularly public spaces, the better you probably fare in the planning and dignity department.
Planners do also care a lot about the interface between private and public spaces, facades, entrances, courtyards. Should we maybe in general put more force on private owners of land, of buildings, to design, to provide inclusive interfaces, to provide shelter, for example, to be more open to the public, to be more open to private space for just disadvantaged people, for people who might just need these spaces to walk around, to sit down, to relax, or even if you think about homeless, to sleep.
Personally, I do not think that putting force on private owners is the most important and most effective instrument of spatial planning. The use of coercion takes up enormous strength, and very often planning departments simply are not staffed enough. They don't have enough resources to exercise strength all the time. So I think it's important to persuade, it's important to motivate, it's important to help landowners understand that property is a social function, and that it's not just about their rights, but it is also about the way society comes together. It's about cohesion. And therefore, therefore, I think that all sorts of plans to integrate are extremely helpful. For example, have been living for a couple of months now in the city of Bielefeld. In Bielefeld, it's not a very famous place, but with social policy people, it is famous because it is the location of Bethel, which is a open hospital slash housing for people with mental disabilities or who have different needs. And Bielefeld is extremely welcoming to this community in terms of not only allowing everybody to share public spaces, but most people are extremely friendly to the patients or residents of Bethel whenever you meet them here. I do not expect that this would be the same in Wien or in Dortmund, but this is something where a urban society has learned to use public space in an integrating and inclusive manner. And this has not at all been done by force or by coercion, but this is something that people have learned to do.
But can you imagine ways that help us as a planner to move in that direction? I also see the question, why is it not the same in Dortmund? So what happened in Bielefeld, or what can foster such things, such support happening and allowing us to live in dignity?
Oh, I'm getting into hot water now. So I'm neither from Bielefeld nor from Dortmund. I was born and raised in Vienna, Austria, and that means that I'm a foreigner here. And I think that foreigners have to be very respectful of their urban environments. Having said that, I have discovered, or I have learned, experienced people in Dortmund to be rather tough, a bit impolite, extremely friendly, and a bit impatient, particularly when it comes to traffic situations. Whereas people particularly if you're on a bicycle,
Yeah.
whereas people in Bielefeld are much more intellectual. If I go to a coffee shop, not for smoking, but for having coffee in Bielefeld, before the COVID crisis, of course, so this is memory of a long gone time. It was very likely that there were a group of 60 to 70-year-old persons sitting next to me discussing Habermas or Luhmann. This would never have happened in Dortmund. So there is a level of intellectuality that might be contributing to the great tolerance and friendliness towards the inhabitants of Bethel.
Now we've talked about foreigners and people moving, so let's get to the long gone past, last week. So until Corona, people increasingly moved internationally, like all of us. We came back from Belgrade just last week from our excursion. But if we look on what we do as planners and designing public spaces, so would you say everyone using a public space has the same justified stake in it, or should locals with their more? If you walk around Bielefeld, what do you think? Should your dignity matter the same as locals who have been born and raised in Bielefeld, or is there a difference?
Okay, I think that I want to answer rather in a normative fashion. What we are needing now is international cooperation and international solidarity to replace the, how should I put it, international exploitation. What tourists have been doing, millions of tourists have been doing over the past 2 decades, is a horrible crime against nature, and it's a horrible crime against local populations. This is not a form of internationality that I can accept. On the other hand, I think it is extremely important not to get into a parochial shell now, to lock the door and make sure that nobody gets close. But now is a time where solidarity and cooperation is required. Does that respond to your question?
Yeah. Do you have a guess how we could do that and support that with an outlook also beyond the emergent current crisis? Because our answer to Corona has a huge spatial component, so thereby we retreat from public spaces back to staying at home. But we still rely on keep social contacts, and we still have a spatial component in ourselves, in our lives. So we want to go outside. So do you have a guess what that means for our urban societies?
I'm not an expert on that, so I can really just guess, as planners love to do. I think that there is a horrible aspect in social distancing, as this technique is now called. And that aspect is asocial behavior or even antisocial behavior. The German phrase räumliche Distanzierung makes it much more clear that the prevention of spreading of COVID requires from everybody to keep spatial distance. And I think actually this is in my view, the big challenge now. How do we keep spatial distance, but not social distance? How do we maintain social connections and social practices, although we are asked or ordered to maintain spatial distance from each other? I have just anecdotes to add here. So when I took a walk this morning in the park, the lane is about 4 or 5 meters wide. 2 ladies were walking towards me, and they were keeping distance at least 2 meters from each other, and they were talking with each other. And when they were approaching me, without really any sign or any special directions, they were suddenly turning to the side. So they stood at the left side of the lane, 2 meters apart from each other, and I could pass on the right side of the lane. And once I've passed and we greeted each other, they sort of got back into their sharing of the public space and continued their walk. So we need to learn behavior that allows us to keep spatial distance, but not turn us into anti-social entities in a cocoon, in a shell, that have no social connections any longer. And certainly this morning I also have noticed that many people confuse keeping distance to each other with not recognizing each other, not acknowledging each other. So everyone, not everyone, but many people I've met, and I'm sure that everybody is making similar experiences at the moment. They are often withdrawn, they look down, they don't look
Mm-hmm.
at others, no greeting, no hi or hello or whatever, yoo-hoo.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is a big risk. In how far that translates into planning practices or new planning
Mm-hmm.
practices, I'm not sure yet. I
Yeah,
think
isn't
there
it?
are. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, isn't opportunity in that? Let's say at least these kind of your encounter this morning. So these two women, they were in kind of social contact, but still they were very aware of their surroundings, of what happens around there. So isn't that also an opportunity that more people really look at their environment, look of who's there, what's happening, and thereby also maybe sharpen the view on how our space looks, what it provides, and what it enables.
Yes, I totally agree that this this would be in a way an opportunity to take a fresh look. But I'm saying that well my in my mind, Albert Camus' words about the plague.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, a very interesting and uh, a book that I would recommend to everybody. And what Camus is saying is that, yeah, the plague teaches us, but at a price that is much too high. We should
Mm-hmm.
have learned these lessons without these enormous sacrifices. And the situation in Wuhan, as well as the situation in Bergamo or in Spain, and in many other places at the moment is so horrible that it's, I think, a little bit it's not becoming to think about, oh, what can we learn from COVID. It was not
Mm-hmm.
meant in that way.
Should we maybe take this as a starting point to also think more kind of local on very small scale places, parks, the very local neighborhoods where people now increasingly rely upon? So I took there like cars parking on the sidewalks. So keeping physical distance only works when walking on the street uh, or not walking at all. So kind of we might need to look more at the very small scale local surroundings that we make daily use of and that we somehow might have forgotten or not respected in the last years.
One thing I've learned when I became a planner uh, was that a great strength of planning lies in the recognition of different levels and scales of space. And I think that what you're saying part is very true. These
Mm-hmm.
niches, these places are extremely important, vital, maybe essential for surviving now. But it's also beneficial and probably also essential. Keep in mind at the same time the relationship between the local level and the city level, the regional level, the national level, and a global or international level. And I do not believe that you can understand things like traffic or trade or education without taking into account these different levels of spatiality, because each of these levels contributes to traffic, to trade, to education. And, and that is what I found quite
Mm-hmm.
important for me as when I became a planner to understand this interconnectedness of different spatial
Mm-hmm.
levels.
Yeah, so we are actually a very diverse international group, many students from different countries. So now all together in this online environment. But if we speculate a bit towards the future, we'll see more borders, more exclusion on different scales popping up. So do you have a piece of advice for all of us, what we should be careful about, let's say after the emergent matters are done and the crisis decreases? So what's important to keep in mind, and what should we really keep in mind, if especially we think about dignity and this less dignity?
Oh yeah, dignity.
Mhm.
Let me start. Let me start from there. One of my favorite dignity theories is by a German sociologist called Niklas Luhmann. Incidentally, Niklas Luhmann taught as a professor of sociology at the University of Bielefeld, which is located about a kilometer from where I'm sitting now. And Niklas Luhmann developed in the 1960s a dignity theory that was totally outlandish with regard to every other dignity theory. To him, dignity is a process of establishing and displaying the self, self-promotion, defining yourself. Whether you want to eat vegan or whether you want to eat meat, whether you want to be conservative or whether you want to be a flaming socialist, or whether you want to be politically totally indifferent, is a part of a process of defining yourself and of displaying the self, of showing off the self, of demonstrating the self. The German word is Selbstdarstellung, and I'm not sure how that translates into Dutch, but I'm not sure. It's very difficult to translate the word into English. So I'm using very often the term self-promotion, but I'm not sure whether that is the best way to translate it. And social distancing goes at the heart of Selbstdarstellung, goes against the grain of self-promotion. In a way, social distancing requires from us to withdraw from the world, which comes rather close to denying our own existence. And of course, this is a huge danger for human dignity. In order to prevent the virus from spreading, surely we must not deny ourselves the right to exist. And we must find ways to still continue to express ourselves, to express our love and commitment for others, to connect to others. I think that this is in a time where dignity, in a way, is both under great danger, but also could be extremely helpful to overcome this crisis, because in carefully thinking about the way we still perceive ourselves at the same time victims of COVID and the ones who have to save everybody else from COVID, we can use human dignity as a source of energy, and I think we should do that. I'm not sure whether that connects directly into urban planning, but Christian and I have agreed that we would start to try to make these connections, and at the moment I think that everybody is a planner.
That's a good statement. I think it really fits well into our course, because one part of this course is actually to find grounding for normative statements, a grounding for defining a known role as future planner, and also spatial planning, which at least for the next few weeks or months looks rather different to what we expected it to be the last year. Thanks again very much. I think we should close soon. We are nearing 3 p.m.
Yes.
So thanks again for you joining our discussion. Do you have one final sentence for all of us as a takeaway message?
Oh, my final sentence is, please distance yourself spatially while you're integrating yourself socially. Keep your hands clean and your spirits up. And thank you for having me for this exchange.
Thank you very much for joining today. So that was our lecture for today.